Hey everyone in business law. I was going to put up a quick video on chapter 17, and it's about formalities of sale. And just like it suggests, what do we have to have a valid sale? We know if it's a contract to sell and it's more than $500 for goods, the statute of frauds under the UCC, been around long before the UCC, has been around since the 1600s. It requires that a writing be created and signed by the party against whom resistance is being made. So if I contract with you and you sign the contract, that contract is enforceable against you because you signed it. It might not be enforceable against me because I haven't, but if I'm willing to go and try to enforce it, it shows my true intent to be bound in it. This chapter is talking about, well, when don't you need, or what has to be in the writing, one, and two, what are the exceptions to the written rule? Not much has to be in the writing, enough to show the meeting of the minds, what one party is obligated to do, what the other party is obligated to do. And it's not always a lot of people think, well, there's no date. When do the parties have to be performed or do their performance? It's at a reasonable period of time if it's not articulated in it. And that is the question now. When can we bring in oral evidence to show what the party's true intent was? Usually never. It's called the parole evidence rule. You're not supposed to bring in oral evidence to modify, change, alter the terms that are written in the contract, as long as the contract is what? Complete and not ambiguous. Well, what if it's not complete? Something's missing about time or performance. Now you can bring in oral evidence of when the parties expected performance to be conducted because it's missing something. It's coming up short in terms of the terms. The other time oral evidence is allowed in is when there's an ambiguity, meaning there's something that seems to be a bit like on chapter or on page 3, it says there's going to be an interest rate of 7%. But when we go over to page 9, it references a 9% interest rate. There's an ambiguity in the contract. There, the courts will allow oral evidence in to show what the true meanings of the party is. It doesn't nullify the validity of the writing. It just needs to be clarified. Now, are there some other exceptions to goods over $500 where we'll allow the parties to proceed? Well, one is if the parties simply perform. I'm buying a snowblower from you, a used snowblower. It's in really great shape. It's only a few years old. I'm going to give you $800. If I give you $800 and you give me the snowblower, we don't care that there wasn't a written agreement. But let's assume today I go over, I shake your hand, I agree I'm going to buy your snowblower for $800. I go home, I start having second thoughts, I'd rather just get a new one. Can that person now enforce the agreement upon me? No, because we don't have a writing and it wasn't signed by me. So therefore, the statute of frauds will come in and say that's not binding. But when contracts are completed, a sale, once the sale is done, the court doesn't look back and say, well, there was no writing, so therefore we can unwind it, we can rescind it. That's not true. It's done, it's completed, it's executed. That's why we learned about earlier. Why do we care whether a contract is executed or whether it's executory and unfinished? Because these rules might not apply once it's executed. Think about it. I mean, nowadays, it doesn't take that much to spend $500 if you're at a Lowe's or a Home Depot buying some high-end, machinery or something like that. It doesn't take much to go over $500 at all. You bring it up to the cashier, you pay, and you leave. We don't care that there was a lack of written writing because the party's executed. Well, if it's a contract to sell for some later date, either one party's going to perform later, or the goods need to be manufactured or retained by the seller, we need a writing. Are there exceptions to the rule? That's the fundamental rule. Yeah, there are. One is receipt and acceptance of goods. You deliver the goods to me. I accept them, meaning I exercise dominion and control. I unpackage it. I maybe put gas and oil in that snowblower that was delivered to me. I put it in my garage. I start it up. I use it maybe a couple times. That shows my wanting to become the owner of those goods. Therefore, when the seller says, where's my money? I can't say, well, I never had a written contract with you. It was for $1,500. It's not enforceable. You're right. We didn't perform. It was in its executory stage, and it would have been a good argument. But what did I do? I received the goods, and I didn't reject them upon delivery. I exercised dominion control of them. I exercised ownership. So therefore, the need for writing is exempted under that circumstance. The next one is payment. If I pay for the goods, and you've accepted, you cashed the check, you deposited the funds, it shows your willingness to go forward. So there's another exception to the writing rule. That's payment. Now, sometimes the test question comes up, what about part payment? What about receiving only a portion of the goods? Receipt and acceptance, the rule is how much of you have received and accepted is binding. Same with payment. if you're going to buy 5 different items, each cost $700, and you paid for 3 of them, only the amount that the payment was accepted for would be enforceable, not the entire contract, just for the amount of the specific goods related to it. Judicial admission, this doesn't come up too much. Some of you probably heard the name Perry Mason, but don't know what it is. My sister loves these old movies. She used to force me to watch them. Not movies, it was a show, um, you know, a regular half-hour TV show, black and white, I believe. And this lawyer, every single time, would always be able to get some player that was involved in the event, not the defendant, but some other witness would crack on the stand and admit they were the ones that actually did it. It's similar in nature. It doesn't happen very much, but it'd be like me getting the defendant up on the stand and say, isn't it true you had an oral agreement with my client to buy that snowblower for $2,500 and you simply wanted to back out? And then the defendant on the stand goes, yeah, we did have that agreement, but we never reduced it to writing. And I took Corman's class, and I know it's not enforceable against me because of the rule, the statute of frauds. It is now enforceable against you because you admitted in open court that you had a binding agreement with the other party. Judicial admissions don't happen very often. Very few people admit that I did something wrong, and therefore, but I still should get punished because of the technical rule. That's why it only has a little tiny paragraph in your book, because it just kind of happened. One that does quite a bit is non-resellable goods. I think of an example that I witnessed, although the contract went forward, it wasn't a problem, but I thought it was really unique. I used to do a lot of scuba diving, and there used to be a shop in Leicester, Mass. I forgot what it was called. Now it seems like it's a school bus place, but they used to have a little submarine, little micro submarine on top of the roof for part of their advertising. Inland Divers. And the guy that owned it, I think his name was Earl, or Earl, unusual spelling, a European type spelling name, but he was a tailor actually. He would make wetsuits, the kind out of neoprene, from scratch. So if you were like unusual size, like really tall or very short, or in this case very very large, this guy came in, and I always remember he liked to dive, and he had to be, I don't know him personally, but I remember being in the store because I used to like to hang around there. This guy had to be like 6'5". He had to be close to 400 pounds, just a very very large man. Imagine trying to buy a wetsuit, off the rack, so to speak. So Earl, he took all kinds of measures and said, okay, I can make you a wetsuit, out of this material, this thickness, and this quality. I don't know what it was. Say he says $900. Is that a good? Is a wetsuit, a scuba diving wetsuit, a good? Yeah, it's a movable, identifiable piece of property. Is it subject to being required to be in writing to be enforceable? Yes. But what's the thing about this wetsuit? So say Earl makes the whole thing, puts a lot of time and effort into it, and now the buyer, he calls up the buyer and says, hey, Tom, your wetsuit's all ready to go. Tom says, I've decided to go in a different direction. I had somebody else make me one, or I found one off the rack. Thanks, Earl, but I don't want it. Can Earl enforce the contract? Yes, even though it's not in writing, enforce it because it's a non-resellable good. How many other 6'6", 400-pound guys are going to come into a shop to possibly buy that? It becomes useless to them. I think things like that. I used to be involved in some political stuff, and I always think about ordering, those little emery boards with my name on it, whatever I'm running for. You think about these campaign slogans. Imagine if I called up a campaign slogan company, and there's a few of them out there, several actually, and I order a bunch of signs, $10,000 worth. Is that a good? Those lawn signs are a good. But we never reduce it to writing. And last minute, like I always do when it comes to politics, I change my mind because I don't want to throw my hat in the ring because of fear of losing and work and all that kind of stuff that goes into a campaign. I back out. Now think of this company. What if they printed all those signs up? Well, how many other people are named Jim Corman, spelled with a K, running for some obscure office? Not a heck of a lot. It's a non-resellable good. They should be able to enforce that contract against me. That's another exception to the rule. The next one is auction sales. It's funny how all these things seem to fit my life in terms of having experience. I go to auctions from time to time. I don't know why. I like to do it. But sometimes there's actually auctions with political buttons at it. So I'll look at an advertisement, go, and it can be a lot of fun. Think about it. If you had to reduce everything being sold at an auction that was over $500 to writing, the auction would take forever to get through. So we've created an exception to the rule. So if you've ever been at an auction, usually it goes to the high bidder. There are a couple things the auctioneer has a lot of authority over. People don't realize the auctioneer can actually bid on the goods themselves, and they can reject selling the goods, even though they've accepted a bid initially, if they feel like it's not meriting the appropriate price, because they have a lot of control. But once they hit the hammer down and say, Number one, you register with a number ahead of time. Your number is the high bidder. It's $800. You can't walk away from the obligation saying, hey, they never reduced it to writing. I'm not going to sign anything now. I don't want that thing after all. It's not quite as nice as I thought. Too bad. Auction sales are enforceable against both parties, even though there's no writing. It gets reduced to writing loosely later. You sign a slip. What is the name? What has to be in the writing? Again, I already went over this earlier. Not much. Just the basic terms. What are the what if it's goods, because that's what the chapter is still about, is about goods. They have to identify the goods, how many of the goods, if there's multiple, I'm going to buy just one stick of butter. I'm buying maybe a bunch of sticks of butter for the supermarket chain I organize, and I'm buying it from a big dairy producer. How much the price of the stick of butter probably should be in there. That is where price might be critical, and the amount of pounds or sticks of butter we're going to ultimately order. So you want the terms. You need the signature, not of both parties. Everyone thinks that. You just need the signature of the party that resists enforcement but wants to back away. We need their signature, because if the party that still wants to go forward, you can just sign it right now. Might as well, for practical purposes, get both sides to sign the written agreement, but in theory, only the party trying to renege, we need their signature on the document. Time of execution, you can have this writing done right up to the eve of trial. You could say, well, you admit to it, why don't you sign the contract? Crazy, but they could sign the contract at any time. Once it's signed, it's now enforceable written agreement. And it can also refer to other writing. So the individual written contract may be too vague to be enforceable, but it says this relates to all of our memorandum of understanding incorporated in the memorandum written on, November 1st, 2021. If it references other documents, those documents by nature become incorporated into the ultimate agreement. So it's not a problem. The contract would be valid. And sometimes, it's kind of when you look at the contract, can understand what party A has to do, what party B has to do, what the price is, the amount of the goods. It doesn't have to be written in fancy legal terminology. In fact, it should be avoided, quite frankly. The understanding that an objective, reasonable person with basic reading skills can say, I can read this and I know what party A has to do and perform and give, and I know what party B has to do and perform and give. That's what you want. You want to take out all those, the aforesaid. You don't want to talk like that. No one talks like that. I think that's a big mistake. I think lawyers sometimes want to do that to impress their clients, to have language written in their contracts that sound very, very technical. But you want your client to understand it, because if that has to be presented to a jury or a judge, you want it very clear and straightforward, very overt what the parties have to do, almost a very blockish style of writing. So there's no ambiguities whatsoever. Because if there's ambiguities, oral evidence can come in and maybe modify that agreement. And you don't want that. That's it. It was a very short chapter, and we'll post this right away.